Hello everybody. I tried to make this a quick video a few times. It's not gonna be, but I'm gonna get to the main point really fast so that those of you who are just looking for the answer can hear it and scoot. But the idea behind this video is why the Sony XLR K3M, which is that little audio adapter that you can get for Sony mirrorless cameras, in my case, the A6700, why this is still a piece of equipment that is really necessary in one particular way. There's something that it does that all of these other really high quality and really good pieces of equipment, there's something that this does that they don't. And a lot of the videos I've seen compare the things that those other pieces of equipment do really well to what this one does not quite as well. But they don't tend to talk about the one thing that sets this apart and where it's going to be super useful. So I'm going to give you the answer to that. Then I'm going to go into detail for those of you who are interested. And at the end, if you do have this piece of equipment or you're just planning on getting it, I'll give you some settings to make sure you change sort of how to set it up to get the best sound. So jumping right into it, the thing that this does, the K3M, that the Sound Devices doesn't do for you, or like any Zoom or Tascam, anything like that. This lets you run line level directly into the camera. It accepts line level sources as is without having to make them work with a mic level preamp or a mic level input. All right, so let me go into detail on this. When you're using audio equipment, there are some different signal level landmarks that we use. One of them is line level. Line level is the operating standard of like within audio equipment. So if you're in a mixing board, everything in there is operating at line level. When you plug a microphone into that, in order for it to work with line level, in order for it to be line level, you have to amplify that sound. Now, because it's before the mixer, we call it pre-amplification. It's raising that microphone to a level that can then be used with line level sources or line level equipment. So line level, we kind of call 0 dB, as in it's, you don't need to boost line level for it to be the operating standard. Mic level, we arbitrarily refer to as negative 40 decibels-ish. Meaning that for your average mic level source, for it to be line level, you have to boost it up 40 decibels, which is a lot. Remember that sound is logarithmic. So when you have your, MixPres, your Tascam, any of your external recorders, and you're plugging in microphones through the XLR port, the first thing it's doing is hitting a preamp. And that is where you're setting your gain to get it up to line level. Therefore, it can be encoded cleanly and stuff like that and avoid noise. So you run it into the MixPres, you get it up to line level. Then in order to get it into the Sony, if you want the audio to be directly recorded onto the footage, you then have to run out of like the line out jack, or even worse, the headphone jack, and plug it into the mic input on the mirrorless or the camcorder or whatever it is that you're using if you don't have an audio handle. So you have to take that line level source, drop it back down low enough that it can be accepted by a mic level input. And then that mic level input is just boosting it back up to line level, mic level input, boosting it back up to line level to then work within the, the proper operating range of the camera's audio. That's just an extra step that can change the quality of the sound. It's also adding in room for error. So if you are setting your mic preamp so that the meters aren't overloading, you can still overload that mic preamp without it showing up on the screen. Like if you've turned that down really low, like, 1, 2, or like just so that it's having audio, show up on the screen, and you're running that line level source into it, you can still overdrive that input without it digitally maxing out. And that's not good. You don't want to get your footage afterwards and see that that happened. If you're just using it as scratch audio, sure, that's fine. And that's a place where I would say, don't worry about getting this. If you're just using it as scratch audio and you don't need the in-camera audio to be good. But if you're doing something like live streaming, especially if you're live streaming in a way where you are getting your sound from a mixing board, being able to accept the proper signal level from that piece of equipment is imperative to making sure that your sound isn't getting kind of messed up by the preamps. I've found that preamps on cameras tend to sort of suck a little low end out. So you'll have this great sounding mic, this great sounding mix. And then when it gets into that mic preamp, it'll sort of thin out that sound a little bit in a way that isn't super pleasant. That was just my experience tonally. That screams to an impedance mismatch, but they're both low impedance. We're not going to get into that part. So I'm an audio person, so I'm going to stick to like video talk. So what this lets you do is it lets you come from that mixing board and run into the camera directly. And I've done some tests, and it does sound similar enough that you're not going to tell the difference unless you really get into the weeds. Now, if you have this unit, I'll show you how to set it up to get that in a second. But that's what makes this such a great piece of equipment, is the fact that you're bypassing that whole second preamp. You don't have to worry about that additional level of gain staging. And you can get just the pure sound from whatever it is that you're using into this unit. Now, what I'm using, just as an example, is I'm recording into a Roswell Mini K47X, which is a transformered microphone. So it gives a little harmonic saturation. That is running into a 73 style preamp, Golden Age Pre 73, which is a transformered preamp, a little more saturation. That is then boosting it up to line level. That's what a preamp does. That is running into a DBX 266XS compressor. It's just a VCA compressor, super clean, doesn't color the sound really, but that's keeping my dynamics in check. I'm running out of that line level directly into the input of the Sony K3M. I'm not using my computer. I'm not using any additional external recorder. The sound you're hearing, other than a volume boost, I might boost the volume up. I'm really playing it safe with the headroom, so I might boost the volume up in post. But other than that, the sound you're hearing right now is just the sound that's coming out of the camera. Again, for live streaming, this is amazing, because then even on something like Zoom or Google Meet, I can just select, I have a cam link, I can just select that as both my audio and video input, and it's perfect. Even if you run out of the USB-C, mine transmits audio. I didn't think they were supposed to over USB-C, but for some reason mine is, which is great. I don't know, maybe there was a firmware update, but that audio is just going to be this lovely line level input. I don't have to worry about going into like OBS and syncing things and, delaying the audio so that it matches with the video. It's just working. So question is, what settings should you use if you are using this piece of equipment? So we're going to start on the back of the unit. You have two switches. One of them is your routing. The other one is digital to analog. My camera works with digital. I know not all Sonys do, but if you can use the digital output, I would do that. So select digital if you can. On your actual camera, go in and select whatever track count and bit depth makes sense. I would say for most people, if you're just using one microphone, go 24-bit and 2-channel. You don't need the 4 channels unless you are actually additionally using the third input with microphones. So 2 channels, 24-bit, that's going to give you the most dynamic range in terms of the bit depth. Then let's move over to the side of the unit. Set the attenuator to 0. We don't need to drop the signal level because, again, we're not running. This is where if you were running a line level unit a line level signal into this unit, this is where you would drop it 40 decibels. This is where you would help get it down to mic level. But we don't need that, so we can set that to 0. Then on your signal level, make sure that it's set to line and not mic or mic with phantom power. Set it to line level. Then make sure it's on manual so that we're using the knob to adjust the volume. And this is the part where I kind of made this mistake early on until I really sat and thought about it. Turn the volume all the way up. It seems counterintuitive because typically when we're using things like this, we think, oh, well, if the knob's all the way up, it's going to be noisy. But that's the preamps that are adding noise, and line level is not using the preamps. So you can still adjust kind of what we call the trim of it, which is raising or lowering that line level signal. But there's so little noise introduced in this line level signal that we can turn it all the way up and it's going to be good to go. What this helps us avoid, and this is the biggest piece, is I was running into issues where I was clipping the input, I was driving the analog input, but my meters on the screen were not getting into the red. Because what was happening is I was lowering the input volume because I was thinking, oh, lower volume, less noise. And I was turning it up on my outboard gear. And what was happening is I was clipping, I was driving that analog input, but because I had turned that knob down, that clip point had moved away from the actual digital converter clipping. So again, and that's all what we call gain staging, making sure that things are properly leveled all along the way. So I was clipping the analog part, but I wasn't clipping the analog to digital converter. So if you turn the knob all the way up, what that will let you do at the expense of like unnoticeable noise for what you're recording, what that will let you do is know that as long as you are not clipping on the screen, that you're not clipping on the actual recording. So now I can get all the way up to the top of the meter, and unless it's turning red, I'm not clipping. So the last thing on this side panel is there are high pass filters. I believe they call them high pass and not low cut, but it's on the side. I can't see from where I'm sitting. So make sure that those are off. If you're using a line level source, chances are you're using something else that has high pass or low cut filters on it, and you'll want to use those. It's just making sure that you know where all of your controls are and not having random other low cuts happening throughout the chain. If you set this up the way that I just told you to, if you're plugging a line level source into this, you will not have to touch anything else on the camera. You just do it all on your actual gear, and then the as long as you're not clipping on the screen, it'll sound good. So turning off those high pass filters makes it so just everything is controlled from over here. So that's really it. If you sat all the way through to hear the details and the settings, fantastic. Thank you for your time. Hopefully this was helpful. As I said, this is a thing that I haven't heard talked about a lot, and this was the information that I was looking for when I was researching this unit. This was the purpose why I wanted to get it. So with that being said, thank you for stopping by. Hopefully this was informative for you, and we will see you next time.